June 15, 1947, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Evergreen Children's Home on Denniston Avenue. On the desk of investigator Warren Holcomb sat a manila folder, thin as a promise. Inside, 3 typewritten pages, a 2x3 photograph, and a complaint letter written in shaky, desperate handwriting. Warren Holcomb, field auditor from the National Child Welfare Foundation out of Philadelphia, noticed something off within 7 minutes of entering the dining hall. 42 children sat at neatly set tables, and every single one of them was smiling. Not just happy, identically. The angle of the mouth, the showing of teeth, the placement of the cheekbones, like 42 photographs of the same face pasted onto different bodies. When he asked for water, a 7-year-old girl in a pressed pinafore brought a pitcher, and her smile didn't waver by a millimeter. Even when he deliberately knocked over the glass and it shattered at her feet, she just lifted her eyes, and the smile stayed exactly the same, like the other 41. The director of Evergreen, Fletcher Durant, had met him at the front steps 2 hours earlier. A man of 62, trim, with military bearing and a chest full of ribbons on his suit jacket. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, European Campaign Medal. Firm handshake, direct gaze. "Mr. Holcomb, pleasure to have you visit our humble facility," the voice measured, diction precise. "I trust the train ride wasn't too taxing?" Holcomb had taken the morning express from Philadelphia. In his briefcase was a folder with a disturbing anonymous letter that had arrived at the Foundation's offices a month ago. __quote_2___. The letter had been written on cheap lined paper, torn from a notebook, in handwriting that wavered between careful script and desperate scrawl. Usually, such letters went straight to the file cabinet, filed under _3, but this one landed on the executive director's desk. The director, a man named Theodore Bancroft who'd spent 30 years in child welfare, had read it 3 times before calling Holcomb in. "4," he'd said, tapping the letter with his fountain pen. "There's something about this one. The specificity. Wind-up dolls. That's not language people usually use. Check it out, but be discreet. Durant has connections." Holcomb had researched Evergreen before making the trip. The home had opened in 1935, right in the depths of the Depression, when orphanages and children's homes were overflowing with abandoned kids. Durant had been appointed director from the start, unusual for someone with no prior experience in child welfare. His credentials were military: West Point graduate, decorated officer in the Great War, then post-war administrative roles. According to newspaper clippings Holcomb had found in the Foundation's files, Durant had convinced a group of wealthy Pittsburgh businessmen to fund the conversion of the old Denniston Academy building into a children's home. His pitch, reprinted in a 1935 Post-Gazette article, had emphasized discipline, structure, and the creation of __6___. That phrase had stuck with Holcomb. Society's discards, as if children were trash to be recycled. Promising investigator, 3 years of solid fieldwork, ability to spot problems where others saw model institutions. That's what Bancroft had told him. Holcomb had earned that reputation by trusting his instincts. He'd shut down 2 homes in New Jersey where children were being used for labor, their education non-existent. He documented abuse at a Catholic orphanage in Maryland where nuns used leather straps on children as young as 5. He knew what institutional harm looked like. But Evergreen looked perfect. The grounds looked impeccable. A 3-story brick building that had been a private academy before the Depression, recently painted crisp white with dark green shutters. Flower beds bursting with marigolds, trimmed lawn, playground with new swings and a merry-go-round that gleamed with fresh paint. Laundry lines stretched between posts, bed linens and children's clothes, all washed to spotless white. No gray, no patches, no mended tears visible. Even the rope on the swings looked new, without the fraying that came from constant use. "We currently house 137 residents." Durant led him down the first-floor hallway, his footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors. Ages 4 to 16. Staff includes 10 house mothers, 4 teachers, a nurse, a cook, and 4 maintenance workers. 20 staff members for 137 children. Ratio better than most private schools. Funding is modest, but we manage. The county provides basic operating expenses, and we supplement through private donations and our farm operation. Last year, we won the Governor's Award for Excellence in Childcare. The ceremony was quite moving. Governor Duff presented it personally. Durant spoke with the practiced ease of someone who'd given this tour many times. Holcomb made notes in his pad, but mostly he watched. Watched how Durant's posture never relaxed, how his hands stayed behind his back in a military rest position, how his eyes scanned every corridor they passed through as if conducting an inspection. The dormitories were spotless. Beds made with matching blue coverlets, each pillow topped with a stuffed toy, teddy bears, cloth dolls, rabbits. The stuffed animals were positioned identically, all facing the same direction, all at the same angle on the pillows. Lockers stood at attention at the foot of each bed, small dressers beside them, walls decorated with children's drawings in frames. But Holcomb noticed something odd. The drawings showed the same subjects rendered in different hands: the Evergreen building, the playground, children in rows. None showed the chaotic imagination typical of childhood art. No dragons, no fantastical scenes, no wild colors. Just representations of daily life, carefully rendered. Everything neat, but without that institutional coldness. Smelled fresh, with a faint scent of pine. Someone had been burning cedar chips in small bowls placed on the windowsills. Durant opened another dormitory door. Smaller beds, more stuffed animals. Holcomb asked. Durant said. Holcomb wrote, "In the classrooms, desks held new textbooks. Chalk at the blackboards didn't crumble. The wall maps showed no wear. Potted geraniums lined the windowsills, their red blooms bright against the white walls. The desks were arranged in perfect rows, each one the same distance from the next. A schedule was written on the blackboard in precise script. Monday schedule, 8 o'clock reading, 9 o'clock arithmetic, 10 o'clock recess, 10:15 history, 11:15 penmanship, 12 o'clock lunch, 1 o'clock science, 2 o'clock deportment, 3 o'clock work education, 4 o'clock free time, 5 o'clock supper, 6 o'clock study, 7 o'clock evening assembly, 8 o'clock bed preparation." Holcomb noticed deportment and evening assembly. "What's taught during deportment?" he asked. "Proper behavior," Durant said. "How to sit, stand, speak. How to interact with adults and peers. Social graces that will serve them well in employment. Many of these children come from chaotic backgrounds. They need structure, clear expectations." "And evening assembly?" "We gather all the children before bed, review the day, acknowledge those who've done well, discuss improvements needed. It reinforces community values and individual accountability." They visited the library next, a small room lined with bookcases. Holcomb scanned the titles: McGuffey readers, arithmetic primers, history textbooks, a few classics: Treasure Island, Little Women, Tom Sawyer. But no fairy tales, no fantasy, no poetry. The books were organized by category and height, spines perfectly aligned. "Do the children choose their own reading materials?" Holcomb asked. "We guide their selections," Durant said. "Reading should be educational and morally instructive. We avoid materials that encourage excessive imagination or emotional indulgence." Holcomb wrote, "No fantasy, no creative literature, controlled reading." "How do you handle discipline?" Holcomb asked, making notes in his pad as they walked down another corridor. "No corporal punishment whatsoever." Durant stopped at a window overlooking the younger children playing kickball in the yard below. "Only counseling and personal example. I believe a child is a blank slate. What gets written on it depends entirely on the adults in their lives. Violence writes violence. Discipline writes order. I choose order." Through the window, Holcomb watched the children play. Or rather, go through the motions of playing. They kicked the ball, ran the bases, but without the usual chaos of children's games. No arguments over rules, no shouting, no laughter. Just the mechanical execution of kickball, Holcomb observed. Durant said with evident pride. The infirmary occupied a sunny corner room on the second floor. Standing in a white uniform was the nurse, around 40 years old, Constance Merritt, according to the logbook lying open on the desk. She was a thin woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, her face expressionless. Shelves stocked with bandages, iodine, mercurochrome, children's vitamins arranged in alphabetical order. A vaccine refrigerator hummed in the corner. Cots with clean white sheets lined one wall. Everything by the book, everything sterile. Infectious diseases? Holcomb flipped through medical charts, examining the neat entries. Each child had a file with vaccination records, height and weight measurements taken monthly, dental checkups. Last year, we had 3 cases of chickenpox, 1 flu, the nurse spoke in monotone, staring at a point above his shoulder. All treated according to protocol. No chronic conditions. All children are healthy. Too healthy, Holcomb thought. In a children's home with 137 kids, only 4 illness cases in a year? He'd been an investigator for 3 years, checked 24 institutions across 5 states, and never seen statistics like these. Most homes dealt with constant minor illnesses, colds, scraped knees, upset stomachs. Kids were walking germ factories, especially when crowded together. What about psychological problems? Bedwetting, nightmares, aggression, withdrawal? No, the nurse blinked. We don't have those problems here. None at all? Mr. Durant's methods are very effective, the nurse said, still not meeting his eyes. Children learn quickly. Learn what, exactly? For the first time, the nurse looked directly at him. Her eyes were flat, empty. Control, she said simply. Holcomb felt a chill run down his spine. He examined her more closely. She stood with perfect posture, hands clasped in front of her, face composed. And she was smiling. Not broadly, but a small, fixed smile that didn't reach her eyes. A pause. 3 seconds, she said. The same rehearsed quality he'd heard from the children. The kitchen smelled of beef stew and fresh-baked bread, normal and homey. The cook, a stout woman with a flushed face named Martha Kowalski, showed him the week's menu posted on the wall. Monday, oatmeal, toast with butter, milk. Lunch, stew, mashed potatoes, green beans, apple pie. Supper, meatloaf, carrots, pudding. Tuesday through Sunday, variety worthy of a hotel. Proteins, fats, carbohydrates in proper proportion. Calories calculated for different age groups. Holcomb checked invoices on a clipboard hanging by the pantry. Durant opened the accounting ledger, a massive book with entries in impeccable handwriting. __quote _54 __. The pantry was well stocked. Sacks of flour and sugar, canned goods, preserved vegetables in mason jars. Everything labeled and organized. Holcomb picked up a jar of green beans. The label read, quote 55, quote, in neat script. Quote 56, quote 57, quote, Durant said. Quote 58, quote. That phrase again. As if the children's parents were uniformly inadequate. Everything was correct. Too correct. In the 12 years this home had operated, according to archived records Holcomb had reviewed at the foundation offices, there hadn't been a single complaint, a single scandal, a single runaway attempt. Children arrived, grew up, learned trades, and left for independent lives. No problems whatsoever. The state inspection reports were glowing. The county welfare board had never flagged a single issue. Even the fire marshal's inspection showed full compliance. But that anonymous letter, wind-up dolls, and now the dining hall. Special lunch in honor of the visiting foundation auditor. White tablecloths that looked freshly ironed, china plates without chips, fresh apples in a bowl at the center of each table. 42 children of middle age, 7 to 12 years old. The younger children were in the nursery having their lunch, Durant had explained. The older teenagers were at the farm, learning fieldwork. These children had been selected as the showcase. The children sat straight, hands in laps. Dressed clean, boys in dark trousers and white shirts, girls in navy dresses with white collars. Hair neatly combed, the boys with side parts, the girls with braids or buns. And all, absolutely all of them, smiling identically. Holcomb slowly walked around the tables, studying faces more closely now. Angle of lifted lips, approximately 45 degrees. Upper teeth visible, lower concealed. Eyes wide open, gaze directed forward. Even facial muscles tensed uniformly, like plaster masks, like photographs of the same expression printed on different faces. He paused by a boy with red hair and freckles. The boy sat perfectly still, that smile fixed in place, staring straight ahead even as Holcomb moved into his line of sight. "Children, say hello to Mr. Holcomb," Durant said from his position by the wall. "Good afternoon, Mr. Holcomb," in unison, without the slightest variation in inflection. 42 voices merged into one. The effect was deeply unsettling, like hearing a recording, not live children. "Hello there." Holcomb lowered himself into a chair next to a girl about 9 years old. Blonde hair in neat braids tied with navy ribbons. Gray eyes, clear and empty. That smile. "What's your name?" Delphine. The girl didn't turn her head, stared straight ahead. The smile unchanged. "Quote 65, quote 66, she said. Quote 67, quote 68, quote 69. The words were matter-of-fact, no emotion. A child reciting a lesson. A pause. 3 seconds. Then, a rehearsed answer, like a recitation at assembly. Quote 74, quote 75, quote 76, quote 77, quote 78. Another pause. 4 seconds this time. Quote 79, quote. Holcomb felt his stomach tighten. This wasn't a child speaking. This was a programmed response. He looked at the boy across from him, about 11, dark hair slicked back with pomade, broad shoulders suggesting he'd be a strong teenager. Another pause. Same 3 seconds. Vernon's smile didn't waver. Holcomb tried a different tactic. He looked at a small girl at the end of the table, maybe 7 years old, with dark curls and a pixie face. Quote 88, quote 89, quote 90. Pause. 5 seconds this time, longer than the others. Quote 91, quote 92. The little girl looked confused. The smile flickered, almost wavering. Durant stood against the wall, hands behind his back, observing. Face calm with a slight smile of pride. He met Holcomb's eyes and gave a small nod as if to say, "See? Perfectly behaved children." Holcomb stood, walked to the window overlooking the playground. The children didn't turn their heads to follow. Sat motionless with those identical smiles, directed at nothing. He counted silently. 15 seconds. 20. 30. Not one child fidgeted. Not one whispered. Not one looked around. Children didn't do that. Children squirmed. They got bored. They poked each other, passed notes, made faces when adults weren't looking. These children sat like statues. Quote, 95, quote, he asked quietly. Quote, 96, quote. Durant nodded. Quote, 97, quote. The door closed. Holcomb waited, listened. No footsteps in the corridor. Durant had moved away, perhaps to his office, giving the appearance of privacy. Quote, 98, quote. He returned to the table. Quote, 99, quote. 42 pairs of eyes looked at him. The smiles didn't disappear. Postures didn't change. Not a muscle relaxed. The girl blinked. Quaz. 4 seconds this time. Then the smile grew slightly wider. He felled with others. Same result. Not one child could stop smiling. When he asked them to frown, they looked confused. When he asked them to look sad, they asked why they would be sad when everything was so wonderful at Evergreen. The boy's smile never wavered. Anger is a useless emotion. It doesn't solve problems. It creates them. Mr. Durant taught us that anger is what weak people feel when they can't control themselves. But everyone feels angry sometimes. It's normal. Normal isn't the same as correct, Mr. Holcomb. We strive for correctness, not normalcy. Another child, a girl with brown hair and a gap in her front teeth, spoke up without being prompted. Mr. Holcomb, is there something wrong with how we're behaving? No, honey. I'm just trying to understand you better. We're model children, she said. That's what the governor said when he gave Mr. Durant the award. He said we were proof that proper upbringing can overcome any disadvantage. After 25 minutes, he gave up, called Durant back in. Your children are very well behaved, Holcomb said carefully, choosing his words. They've learned the value of self-discipline, Durant replied. It's the foundation of a successful life. I learned it in the military. These children are learning it here. They'll carry it with them forever. After lunch, Durant showed him more facilities. The recreation room held board games neatly stacked on shelves, checkers, chess, dominoes. Books lined another wall, more educational texts, biographies of great Americans, moral instruction manuals. No comic books, no adventure serials. A piano stood in one corner, sheet music for hymns arranged on the music stand. Do the children play the piano? They learn, Durant said. Music is part of our curriculum, but only proper music. Classical pieces, hymns, patriotic songs, nothing frivolous. The chapel where children attended services Sunday mornings was a small room with wooden benches and a simple cross on the wall. A Bible sat on a lectern, bookmarked at Ephesians. Holcomb noticed the verse, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." Do you conduct the services yourself? Holcomb asked. I do, Durant said. We had a visiting minister for a while, but his sermons were too focused on love and mercy. I prefer to emphasize duty and obedience, more practical lessons for these children. The workshop where older boys learned carpentry and metalwork smelled of sawdust and machine oil. Workbenches held tools arranged by size and type. Half-finished projects sat in neat rows, a wooden stool, a metal box, a small shelf. Everything precise, everything functional. No creative projects, no decorative work. The boys who show aptitude for this work are placed in apprenticeships when they turn 16, Durant explained. We have relationships with local factories and workshops. The girls learn sewing, cooking, housekeeping skills. All of them leave here with employable abilities. Everything perfect. Everything controlled. Everything designed to produce compliant, functional citizens. But at what cost? That evening, back at his hotel room in downtown Pittsburgh, Holcomb spread his notes across the bed. Filled 3 pages during the tour. Notes about the children's identical behavior, the absence of normal childhood chaos, the rehearsed responses, the mechanical smiles. Notes about the staff, the flat-eyed nurse, the cook who spoke in the same measured tones as Durant. Notes about the curriculum, the schedule, the __quote _128 _ he hadn't yet seen inside. Something was deeply wrong at Evergreen, but he couldn't put his finger on exactly what. The children were healthy, well-fed, educated. The facilities exceeded standards. No signs of physical abuse, no bruises, no cowering, no fear in the children's eyes. Just emptiness. But those smiles, those identical, unwavering smiles that never reached the eyes, never changed expression, never reflected genuine emotion. He poured himself a bourbon from his flask and stared out the window at the Pittsburgh skyline. Streetlights coming on as dusk settled. People walking home from work, living their lives, free to feel whatever they felt. What had Durant done to those children? He decided to dig deeper. Next morning, he went to the county clerk's office on Grant Street, an imposing stone building with marble floors and high ceilings, requested records on Evergreen Children's Home. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, brought him a thick file. "Evergreen's been operating since 1935, she said. "Clean record. Mr. Durant's been director the whole time. 12 years now. Good man, from what I hear. War hero." Holcomb read through inspection reports. Annual audits from the State Welfare Board, filed every November. Financial statements showing income from county contracts, private donations, farm sales. All impeccable. Not a single violation noted, not a single complaint registered. Every inspection report used glowing language, exceptional cleanliness, well-ordered routine. Children display exemplary behavior. Nutritional standards exceeded. Educational curriculum comprehensive. But he noticed something else in the discharge records. In 12 years, 183 children had been discharged from Evergreen. He cross-referenced with county records of juvenile arrests, psychiatric hospitalizations, welfare applications. Not one former Evergreen resident appeared in any of those files. Statistically impossible. In any population of nearly 200 young people, especially from troubled backgrounds, there should be at least some problems. Petty crime, mental health issues, unemployment, substance abuse. But according to the records, every single Evergreen graduate became a productive, law-abiding citizen. Either Durant had discovered the secret to perfect child-rearing, or something was being concealed. "Do you have forwarding addresses for former residents?" he asked the clerk. "Some. Most move around, you know how young people are. But we keep what we have." She found him 12 addresses in the Pittsburgh area. Former Evergreen residents, now adults between 19 and 28 years old. All still local, which was unusual in itself. Most kids who grew up in institutions left town as soon as they could. Holcomb spent 3 days tracking them down, made a list, organized by location, planned his route. First was Clarence Dietrich, age 23, working as a shipping clerk at a steel mill in Homestead. Holcomb found him during his lunch break, eating a sandwich at a diner near the factory called Maggie's Place. ___138__ Clarence looked up. Young man with neat hair parted on the left, clean-shaven despite the factory grime on his work clothes. And he was smiling. That same smile. The exact same 45-degree angle, the same teeth display, the same empty eyes. Clarence said, "Pause. 3 seconds." That same pause Holcomb had noticed in the children. Holcomb pressed. Another pause. Clarence's smile didn't change. The answer sounded rehearsed, mechanical, like something learned by rote and repeated so many times it became automatic. Clarence said. Holcomb felt a chill. The absolute certainty in Clarence's voice. The unquestioning faith. "Do you ever feel angry? Sad? Frustrated?" Those emotions serve no purpose. They're disruptions. Better to stay controlled, stay focused on tasks. But everyone feels emotions. It's human nature. "Human nature is unreliable," Clarence said. "Mr. Durant taught us that. Our parents followed their natures. That's why we ended up at Evergreen. We learned to follow something better. Rules, structure, discipline." Holcomb tried another angle. "What do you do in your free time?" "I work, I maintain my room, I read instructional materials, I sleep. That's all that's needed. No hobbies? Friends? Entertainment? Those are distractions. I prefer to be productive." The young man finished his sandwich with methodical bites, each the same size, wiped his mouth with a napkin, folded it precisely, placed it on the plate. Every movement calculated, controlled. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Dietrich," Holcomb said, knowing he'd get nothing more. ___170__ Holcomb interviewed 11 more over the next 2 days. A seamstress named Mabel Hooper, working at a dress shop in the Strip District. A bus driver named Eugene Walters. A secretary named Loretta Pinsky at a law firm downtown. A factory worker, a telephone operator, a bank teller, a cook, a janitor, a shop clerk, a bookkeeper, a nurse's aide. All between 19 and 28. All employed, law-abiding, functional. And all smiling that exact same smile. When he asked about their childhoods, they gave identical types of answers. Mr. Durant taught us well. We learned discipline. Everything was proper. None showed spontaneity. None showed genuine emotion. None seemed to have any life outside work and basic maintenance of existence. Mabel the seamstress never blinked when he deliberately spilled coffee on his notes, testing her reaction. She just pulled napkins from the dispenser and helped him clean up, her smile never wavering, never showing annoyance or surprise. Eugene the bus driver didn't react when Holcomb told a joke about a traveling salesman, just looked at him blankly and said, quote, 174 Loretta. The secretary smiled through a conversation about her mother's death the previous year. It was expected, she said. My mother had pneumonia. I arranged the funeral efficiently. Everything was handled properly. No tears, no grief, no emotion at all. Another former resident, a young man named Thomas Garrett who worked at a print shop, showed Holcomb his apartment when asked. One room in a boarding house, furnished with a narrow bed, a dresser, a desk, a chair. No decorations, no photographs, no personal items. The bed was made with perfect hospital corners. 3 books on the desk, a Bible, a dictionary, an etiquette manual. On the wall, a framed certificate from Evergreen, signed by Fletcher Durant. Awarded to Thomas Garrett for exemplary adherence to standards. This is all you have? Holcomb asked, looking around the barren room. This is all I need, Thomas said. Mr. Durant taught us that possessions create attachment, and attachment creates weakness. I keep only what's functional. Don't you get lonely? Loneliness is an emotion. Emotions are disruptions. I have my work, my routine. That's sufficient. That evening, Holcomb sat in his hotel room and wrote a detailed preliminary report to the foundation. 15 pages, single-spaced. Something was systematically wrong at Evergreen. The children, and former children, showed signs of severe emotional conditioning. Possible psychological manipulation. The results were adults who functioned but didn't truly live, who worked but didn't feel, who existed but weren't fully human. He documented everything. The identical smiles, the rehearsed responses, the 3-second pauses, the absence of normal emotional variation, the mechanical quality of behavior, the absolute devotion to Durant's teachings. Recommended immediate intervention. Psychological evaluation of current residents. Investigation of Durant's methods, particularly the quote 183 and quote 184 review of training techniques and disciplinary procedures. He mailed the report by registered mail, marked urgent, then returned to Evergreen the next morning. Asked Durant if he could observe classes and daily routines more extensively. Durant led him to a 3rd-floor room. 20 children, ages 7 to 9, sat at desks arranged in perfect rows. A teacher, a severe-looking woman in her 40s with gray hair and a bun, stood at the blackboard teaching arithmetic. Her name was Miss Pritchard, according to the nameplate on her desk. Quote 185 Hands shot up. Every child raising their hand identically. Right arm straight up, elbow locked, left hand in lap. Durant called on a boy in the front row. Quote 186, 187. Pause. That same 3-second pause. Quote 188, the boy said. Quote 189. Holcomb's stomach turned. The teacher's lesson wasn't about arithmetic. It was about conditioning behavior, suppressing natural inclination, replacing desire with obligation. Miss Pritchard, Durant said, please continue with the deportment exercise. The teacher nodded. Children, stand. 20 children stood in unison, chairs scraping back at the same moment. Posture check. The children straightened, shoulders back, chins up, hands at their sides. Smile. 20 identical smiles appeared, like masks being put on. Hold that expression. Good posture and pleasant expression represent Evergreen. Whenever you're in public, whenever you interact with others, this is how you present yourselves. You are ambassadors of everything Mr. Durant has taught you. The children held the pose for a full minute. Not one wavered. Not one fidgeted. Very good. Be seated. They sat in perfect unison. Holcomb felt sick. This wasn't education. This was programming. He asked to speak with Durant privately. They went to the director's office, a wood-paneled room with certificates on the walls and a photo of Durant in military uniform shaking hands with someone Holcomb didn't recognize. Later, he'd learn it was General Pershing. "Mr. Durant, I need to ask you something directly," Holcomb said, trying to keep his voice level. "Your methods of child-rearing, they seem unusual, very focused on control and suppression of natural impulses." "Unusual how?" "The children all behave identically. They speak in similar patterns. They show the same emotional responses, or lack thereof. It's like they've been programmed." Durant leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled in front of him. Through the window behind him, Holcomb could see children in the yard playing organized games under supervision. Everything orderly, everything controlled. "Mr. Holcomb, let me explain something about my philosophy," Durant said. "These children come to us damaged, orphaned, abandoned, removed from abusive or neglectful homes. They arrive broken, chaotic, undisciplined, filled with emotions they don't understand and can't control. My job is to fix them, to teach them how to function in society. By suppressing their emotions? By teaching them self-control." Durant's voice remained even, measured. Quote 205, quote 206, quote 207, quote 208, 209. Durant stood, walked to the window overlooking the playground. Quote 211, quote 212. Durant turned to face him. Quote 214, quote 215. Durant said flatly. Quote, Holcomb felt ice in his chest. This wasn't education. This wasn't child welfare. This was something else entirely. A systematic program to create compliant, emotionless workers. Quote, 217, quote, he said. Quote, 218, quote, quote, 219, quote. Durant led him down to the basement. The temperature dropped as they descended the stairs. The hallway was long and narrow, lit by bare bulbs. Several doors lined both sides. Durant explained as they walked. He opened a door. A small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet. Bare walls painted white. A single wooden chair in the center. A light fixture overhead, bright, institutional. No windows, no decorations, no softness. Durant said. Holcomb couldn't hide his shock. For a child? For a 15-year-old boy who tried to run away. He needed time to understand that escape is impossible and pointless. By the time he emerged, he understood. Never tried again. Graduated successfully 2 years later. This is isolation. It's psychologically harmful, especially for children. It's correction, Durant said calmly, and it works. After time in the reflection room, children emerge calmer, more focused, ready to rejoin the community. They learn that emotional outbursts lead to isolation, that following rules leads to inclusion. Simple behavioral conditioning. Holcomb stared at the empty room. Imagined a child sitting in that chair for hours, alone in the silence, staring at white walls, with nothing but their thoughts and the growing understanding that resistance was futile. What about the evening assemblies? What happens there? They went back upstairs. Durant showed him the main hall, a large room with wooden floors and rows of benches. At the front was a raised platform with a podium. Every evening at 7 o'clock, all children gather here, Durant explained. We review the day's events. I acknowledge children who've displayed exemplary behavior. I discuss problems observed and corrections needed. We recite our core principles together. Core principles? Durant walked to the podium, picked up a laminated card, handed it to Holcomb. Evergreen Children's Home. Core Principles, it read. 1. Rules exist for everyone's benefit. 2. Emotions are unreliable guides. 3. Self-discipline creates success. 4. Individual wants must serve community needs. 5. Past failures don't excuse present duties. 6. Proper behavior is always possible. 7. Excellence is the only acceptable standard. 8. Gratitude is owed to those who teach us. 9. We represent Evergreen in everything we do. 10. Mr. Durant knows what's best. That last principle, the absolute authority. The children recite these every night? In unison. It reinforces the values we're instilling. Repetition is key to internalization. This is indoctrination. This is education, Durant corrected. Education is always indoctrination. The only question is what values you're teaching. I choose productive values over chaotic emotionalism. That evening, back at his hotel, Holcomb called the Foundation's Philadelphia office. Spoke directly with Theodore Bancroft. He told the director. Silence on the line. Then, Holcomb thought about the former residents, their mechanical responses, their identical smiles, their empty lives. Another pause. Bancroft's sigh crackled through the phone line. File your comprehensive report. We'll review it. But Warren, don't expect quick action. These things take time. Committee reviews, legal consultations, political considerations. Durant has powerful friends. Moving against him will require ironclad evidence. Holcomb hung up, frustrated. He knew what take time meant. It meant bureaucratic delays, committee reviews that went nowhere, Durant using his connections to quash the investigation before it truly began. He spent another week in Pittsburgh, interviewed more former residents, 8 more, compiled detailed notes, photographed what he could when Durant wasn't looking. The reflection room door, the evening assembly hall, the children in their identical poses. He spoke with neighbors of Evergreen. An elderly woman who lived across the street said, quote, 255, quote. A shopkeeper down the street, quote, 256, quote. A policeman who patrolled the neighborhood, underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 257, underscore, underscore. No one saw the problem. They saw only the results, compliant, productive citizens. They didn't see the cost. His final report was 23 pages, single-spaced, typed on his portable typewriter in the hotel room. He submitted it to the Foundation, to the Pennsylvania State Welfare Board, to the County Child Protection Office. And then he waited. Weeks passed. No response from the state. No acknowledgement from the county. The Foundation sent a brief note. Report received. Under review. 1 month. 2 months. Finally, in September, he received a letter from the Foundation director. Dear Mr. Holcomb, your concerns regarding Evergreen Children's Home have been thoroughly reviewed by our board and by an independent inspection team we commissioned. The team visited the facility unannounced and conducted extensive interviews with staff and residents. They found no evidence of abuse or neglect. Mr. Durant's methods, while unconventional, appear to produce exceptional outcomes. The children are healthy, well-educated, and well-adjusted by all observable standards. The facility exceeds all regulatory requirements. The former residents interviewed showed no signs of psychological harm. Indeed, they demonstrated exemplary adjustment to adult life. The matter is considered closed. We appreciate your diligence but find no basis for further action. Holcomb crumpled the letter. They'd whitewashed it. Someone with power had protected Durant. The __quote _260 _ had probably spent an afternoon there, interviewed children who gave them rehearsed answers, spoke with Durant who explained his methods as innovative education, and concluded everything was fine. They didn't see what he saw, or they didn't want to. He tried going to the newspapers, first the Pittsburgh Press, then the Post-Gazette. Both declined to run the story. Quote, 261, quote, their editors said, quote, 262, quote. One reporter, a young woman named Iris Callahan at the Press, met him for coffee at a diner in Market Square. Quote, 263, quote, she said, stirring cream into her coffee. Quote, 264, quote, 265, quote, 266, quote, 267, quote, Holcomb admitted, quote, 268, quote, 269, quote. She paid for both their coffees and left, looking back once with an expression of genuine regret. Holcomb returned to Philadelphia, defeated. He continued working as a field investigator, checking other institutions, writing other reports, shut down 2 more problematic homes, helped improve conditions at a dozen others, did good work. But Evergreen haunted him. In his files at home, growing thicker, notes, photographs, transcripts of interviews, copies of records. Everything documented, everything preserved, waiting for the day when someone would finally listen. In 1949, 2 years after his investigation, he received troubling news. Clarence Dietrich, the young shipping clerk he'd interviewed, the first former resident he'd tracked down, had died unexpectedly, only 25 years old. The official report said heart failure, but Clarence had no history of heart problems. Healthy young man, physically fit, no medical issues. Holcomb attended the small funeral at a Catholic church in Homestead. Clarence's co-workers were there, looking confused. He was always so cheerful, one said. Never complained about anything, just kept smiling and doing his job day after day. The smile. That smile that never changed. After the funeral, Holcomb went to Clarence's boarding house room. The landlady remembered him from his investigation and let him in. The room was immaculate. Bed made with hospital corners. Clothes hung in precise order by type and color. No personal items, no photographs, no decorations, just functionality. On the small desk was a journal. Brown leather, well worn. Holcomb opened it. Every page was the same. __quote _272 __. Date after date, month after month. Years of identical entries. The handwriting neat, controlled, without variation. And on the last page, written in shakier handwriting, the letters uneven. __quote _273 __. Holcomb closed the journal, sat on the perfectly made bed and wept. A young man had died, and he'd never truly lived. He took the journal, kept it with his files, evidence of what he couldn't prove. He tried one more time to get Evergreen investigated, wrote to federal authorities, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, wrote to his congressman, wrote to the U.S. Children's Bureau, sent them everything. His reports, Clarence's journal, photographs, interview transcripts. Nothing happened. No investigations opened, no inquiries made. The replies, when they came, were polite form letters. __quote _274 __. The state authorities he'd already contacted, who'd already concluded everything was fine. In 1952, 5 years after his investigation, Holcomb quit his job at the foundation. Couldn't stand being part of a system that protected such practices, that valued measurable outcomes over immeasurable harm, that defended institutions instead of children. He became a social worker in Philadelphia, working directly with troubled kids at a community center in North Philly, tried to give them what Evergreen never did: the freedom to feel, to be imperfect, to be angry or sad or joyful, to be fully human. He married Martha, a teacher he met through the community center, had 2 daughters, Sarah in 1954, Rebecca in 1956. Normal life on the surface. Good father, devoted husband, respected social worker. But he never forgot Evergreen. The files stayed in a locked cabinet in his home office. Sometimes Martha would find him there late at night, reading through the old reports, staring at the photographs of children with identical smiles. "You have to let it go," she'd tell him gently. Quote 276, quote 277, he'd reply. In 1963, he saw a newspaper article in the Philadelphia Inquirer. Fletcher Durant, beloved director of Evergreen Children's Home, retires after 28 years of service. Over 300 children raised under his guidance, all successfully integrated into productive adult lives. Pittsburgh community honors his dedication with testimonial dinner attended by city and state officials. 300 children. 300 lives shaped by his methods. Holcomb cut out the article, put it in the drawer with his old Evergreen files. The photograph showed Durant, now 78 years old, accepting a plaque from the mayor. Still trim, still military bearing, still proud. In 1971, Durant died. The obituary in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette called him a hero, an innovator, a man who gave orphans a chance at normal lives. The funeral was well attended. Former residents came from across Pennsylvania to pay respects. The article quoted several. "Mr. Durant gave me the skills to succeed in life." Thomas Garrett, age 43, accountant. "Without his discipline, I would have ended up like my parents, lost and useless." Mabel Hooper, age 41, seamstress. "He taught us the value of rules and structure. I'm grateful every day." Eugene Walters, age 45, transit supervisor. All of them still using the same language, still reciting the lessons, still unable to see what had been done to them. Holcomb was 71 by then, retired from social work for 6 years. He wrote a detailed letter to the Pittsburgh newspapers describing everything he'd discovered in 1947, everything he'd tried to prevent, everything that had been ignored. Neither the Post-Gazette nor the press published it. "Ancient history," one editor wrote back. "No public interest in events from 24 years ago." In 1985, he tried one final time to find Delphine, the blonde girl with the unchanging smile, the one he still remembered most vividly. Used the Freedom of Information Act to access old records. Found her. Delphine Hartley, born 1938, discharged from Evergreen 1954 at age 16. Worked as a telephone operator at Bell Telephone until 1968. Married Leonard Hartley in 1960. One daughter born 1962, named Ruth. Address: Squirrel Hill Neighborhood, Pittsburgh. He was 85 by then, in failing health. Heart problems, arthritis, the accumulated weight of 8 decades. But he had to know. Had to see if there was any hope, any sign that the damage hadn't been permanent. Took the train to Pittsburgh one last time in early spring. The city had changed. Skyscrapers where warehouses used to be, highways cutting through old neighborhoods, the steel mills closing one by one. But Squirrel Hill looked much the same. Found the house, a modest bungalow with neat flower beds just starting to show early tulips. Rang the doorbell. A woman in her late 40s answered. Blonde hair gone gray, pulled back in a neat bun. Face lined with age but recognizable. And those eyes, same gray eyes he remembered. And that smile, that perfect, unchanging smile. She looked wary, uncertain who this elderly man at her door might be. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. The living room was immaculate, furniture arranged precisely, sofa centered on the wall, armchairs positioned at exact angles, coffee table perfectly aligned. No clutter, no casual disorder. Everything in its place. On the mantel, a photo of a young woman in a graduation gown, cap positioned perfectly straight. Delphine said, noticing his gaze. They sat in the kitchen at a formica table. Delphine poured coffee with practiced, precise movements. Cup centered on saucer, Spoon laid parallel, sugar bowl positioned exactly. Holcomb explained who he was, carefully. That he'd visited Evergreen in 1947 when she was a child. That he'd tried to help. That he'd spent 38 years thinking about that place and the children there. Delphine listened without expression. When he finished, she sipped her coffee, the cup returning to the exact same spot on the saucer. "Why are you here, Mr. Holcomb?" "I wanted to know how you are, if you're all right, if life has been good for you." "I'm fine. I work part-time at the library now, organizing books, maintaining the card catalog. I keep my house. I raised my daughter properly. Everything is as it should be." "But are you happy?" She looked at him with those gray eyes, no emotion in them, just emptiness. "I do what's expected of me. Isn't that the same thing?" "No," he said gently. "It isn't." She smiled, that same smile. 45-degree angle, upper teeth visible, muscles tensed in exactly the same configuration he'd seen 40 years ago. Quote 296, quote 297, quote 298, she said calmly, as if discussing the weather. Delphine looked toward the photograph on the mantel. She paused, that 3-second pause still intact after all these decades. Quote 304, quote 305, quote. Delphine looked confused. Quote 306, quote 307, quote 308, quote, she corrected, her voice still calm, still measured. She genuinely seemed to not understand. She stood, gathered the coffee cups with mechanical efficiency, rinsed them in the sink, placed them in the dish rack to dry. Quote 317, quote 318, quote, he repeated. She looked at him for a long moment. Quote 319, quote, she said finally. Quote 320, quote 321, quote 322. He wanted to argue more, to somehow break through the conditioning, to reach the real person buried under decades of Durant's programming. But looking at her empty eyes, her perfect smile, her precise movements, he knew it was impossible. Whatever Delphine might have been had been overwritten too thoroughly, too long ago. He left shortly after, walked to his hotel through the Pittsburgh streets, feeling every one of his 85 years. His heart felt heavy, his steps slow. 40 years he'd carried this, and now he knew for certain. There was no rescue, no redemption. The damage was permanent. Delphine stood at her window, watching him go. An elderly man, bent with age, walking slowly down her quiet street. She felt nothing watching him leave. No curiosity, no concern, no connection. She smiled her perfect smile, the one she'd learned over 4 decades ago in the reflection room. The smile that never wavered, never changed, never revealed anything. Inside, she felt nothing. Just like always. Just like every day since she was 9 years old. Warren Holcomb died in 1987 at age 87 of heart failure. Before his death, confined to a hospital bed, he gave his Evergreen files to his eldest daughter, Sarah. "This is a story that needs to be told someday," he said, his voice weak but urgent. "So people understand, harm doesn't always look like harm. Sometimes it wears medals and speaks of discipline and gets awards from governors. And it can damage souls while claiming to save them. Promise me you'll keep these files. Someone, someday, needs to know what happened there." Sarah kept the promise, kept the files in her attic for years. Eventually, in 2005, donated them to the University of Pittsburgh archives. They sit there still, in box 247, Series 4, labeled Evergreen Children's Home Investigation, 1947 to 1952. Researchers rarely look at them. The few who do find the story disturbing but impossible to verify. Most of the principals are dead, the institution closed, the evidence circumstantial. The building on Denniston Avenue still stands. Evergreen closed in 1989 when changing welfare policies and declining enrollment made it financially unviable. Now it's a community center called the Denniston Community Hub. People take yoga classes in what used to be dormitories, play basketball in the gymnasium, attend meetings in the former dining hall. The reflection rooms in the basement were converted to storage spaces. None of the current users know what happened in those white-walled rooms, what children learned there in isolation. The building's history is commemorated with a small plaque by the entrance. Formerly Evergreen Children's Home, 1935 to 1989, providing care and education to Pittsburgh's youth. No mention of Fletcher Durant, no acknowledgement of his methods, just the bland language of institutional memory. Delphine Hartley still lives in her Squirrel Hill bungalow as of this writing. Now 90 years old, she maintains her house with the same precision she's practiced for 7 decades. Her daughter Ruth visits on Sundays with the grandchildren, 2 boys, well-behaved, quiet. Delphine babysits them properly, feeds them nutritious meals, ensures they follow rules. The grandchildren sometimes ask, quote, 327, quote. She answers, quote, 328, quote. Ruth hasn't taught her own children. Durant's full philosophy, but elements remain. Structure over spontaneity, duty over desire, control over expression. The legacy continues, diluted but persistent, passed down through generations who don't know its origins. Of the 300 children who passed through Evergreen during Fletcher Durant's 28-year tenure, not one became a criminal. Not one developed documented substance abuse problems. All maintained steady employment. Most married, most raised families, all paid taxes. Model citizens by every measurable standard. But if you spoke with them, even now, those still living, mostly in their 80s and 90s, you'd notice patterns. The careful speech, the controlled expressions, the absence of spontaneous emotion. The dutiful lives lived according to rules internalized in childhood. You'd see the smiles. Still identical. Still empty. Fletcher Durant is buried in Allegheny Cemetery under a simple headstone. __quote _329 __. Every year on the anniversary of his death, flowers appear on the grave. Small bouquets, simply arranged. Probably former residents, some now quite elderly themselves. Those who still remember the rules. Those who still believe he saved them. The system he created outlived him by decades, though not in the form of a specific institution. As an idea, that children can and should be reshaped, molded, programmed. That emotional expression is weakness. That compliance is virtue. That individual wants must serve larger purposes. That feelings are unreliable and should be suppressed in favor of duty. These ideas didn't die with Durant or close with Evergreen. They persist in various forms, in various institutions, under various names. Always with good intentions. Always producing measurable results. Always claiming to help children prepare for adult life. And no one was held accountable for Evergreen. Because on paper, everything was proper. Children were healthy, fed, educated. What was missing inside them? The capacity for joy, for spontaneous feeling, for individual desire, for genuine human connection. That doesn't show up in inspection reports. You can't audit the soul. This story didn't end in a courtroom. Not in 1947 when Holcomb filed his report. Not in 1971 when Durant died. Not in 1985 when Holcomb visited Delphine. Not even now, as the last of Evergreen's children enter their final years. It continues in everyone who smiles when they're hurting inside. In everyone who suppresses feelings because that's what proper people do. In everyone who lives by someone else's rules, forgetting, or never knowing, their own desires. In every child taught that emotions are weaknesses to overcome, rather than essential parts of being human. Harm doesn't always announce itself with bruises or scars. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, systematic. Sometimes it wears respectability and earns awards. Sometimes it's justified by good intentions and impressive outcomes. Sometimes it's protected by people who can't or won't see beyond measurable results. And that makes it even more difficult to recognize, to prove, to stop. The children of Evergreen were never beaten. They were never starved. They were never denied education or medical care. By every standard that institutions measure, they were well cared for. But something essential was taken from them in those white-walled rooms, during those evening assemblies, through years of careful conditioning. Something that should have been their birthright as human beings: the freedom to feel, the right to be imperfect, the capacity for authentic emotion. That's the tragedy that Warren Holcomb spent 40 years trying to expose. That's the crime that was never prosecuted. That's the story that needed to be told. Because the children of Evergreen deserved better. They deserved to be seen as whole human beings, not as problems to be fixed or materials to be molded. They deserved to feel the full range of human emotion, not just the narrow band Durant deemed acceptable. They deserved to discover who they were, not to be told who they should be. They deserved to be children. And that was denied to them, systematically and completely, by a man who thought he was helping them. That's what makes it unbearable. This fictional story is based on historical research into mid-20th century institutional practices. While Evergreen Children's Home and its characters are fictional, the emotional suppression techniques described reflect real methods used in some institutions of that era. Modern child welfare standards recognize the importance of emotional development, individual expression, and psychological safety. Today's foster care and child welfare systems, while imperfect, operate under strict oversight and prioritize children's emotional well-being alongside physical care.